What happens when a royal guest thinks they can control America's most trusted morning show? It only took 34 seconds for one heated exchange to completely destroy what was supposed to be a friendly interview. The cameras captured every shocking moment as entitlement collided with journalistic integrity on live television. Make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think about this explosive confrontation. The bright studio lights of Good Morning America illuminated the familiar blue set as George Stephanopoulous shuffled his notes one final time. Across from him sat Meghan Markle, perfectly styled in a cream blazer, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The morning had started like any other celebrity interview, but something felt different in the air. "We're back in 30 seconds, called out the floor director, his voice cutting through the usual pre-show chatter. George glanced at his guest with the warm smile that had made him a household name. "Ready for this?" Meghan's response was crisp, almost businesslike. "I assume you'll be sticking to the topics we discussed." The veteran journalist's eyebrows lifted slightly. In 20 years of broadcasting, guests didn't usually give him instructions. "Well, we'll cover what our viewers want to know about." "That's not what I asked," Meghan replied, her voice carrying a subtle edge that the boom microphones picked up clearly. 10 seconds, announced the director. George straightened his tie and looked directly into camera 2. The red light blinked on. "Welcome back to Good Morning America. I'm here with Meghan Markle, who's joining us to discuss her latest projects in life after stepping back from royal duties." "Meghan, thanks for being here." "Thank you for having me, George." The pleasantries lasted exactly 12 seconds before George asked his first real question. "Let's start with something our viewers are curious about. You've been quite vocal about your experience with the British press. Do you think American media has treated you more fairly?" Meghan's smile tightened. "I think that's a very loaded question." "How so?" "Well, it assumes that fairness is something I should be grateful for rather than something I should expect." Her voice carried a tone that suggested George had somehow offended her. The seasoned anchor remained calm. "I'm just asking about your experience with different media landscapes." "Are you, though?" Meghan leaned forward slightly. "Or are you trying to get me to criticize the British press so you can create a headline?" George's professional demeanor never wavered. "I'm asking a straightforward question about your observations." "Nothing about media coverage of me has ever been straightforward, George. Surely you understand that." The studio audience, initially excited to see a real duchess, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the warm, inspiring interview they'd expected. "Let's talk about your current projects then," George offered, clearly trying to redirect. "You have several initiatives focused on women's empowerment." "I do, and I'm passionate about that work. But I have to say, I'm disappointed that we're starting with negative questions instead of highlighting the positive impact I'm trying to make." George paused, his years of experience telling him something was off. "Meghan, asking about your media experiences isn't negative. It's relevant to your story. Relevant to your story, perhaps, but not to mine." The control room buzzed with tension. Producer Sarah Chin leaned into her headset. "George is handling this well. Stay with it." On set, George tried once more. "What story would you like to tell our viewers today?" "I'd like to tell them about real issues, about the inequality I see in communities across America, about the women who don't have platforms like this one." Meghan gestured around the studio with what appeared to be disdain. "That's exactly what we want to hear about." "Then why didn't you start there?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. George had interviewed presidents, world leaders, and celebrities who could make or break careers. But this felt different. This felt personal, because our viewers are interested in your full story, including how you've navigated public scrutiny. "Your viewers?" Meghan repeated, emphasizing the word "your" as if it tasted bitter. "What about what I think they should hear?" "Well, that's why you're here, to share what you think they should hear, within the parameters you've set." George's patience, legendary among his colleagues, began to show microscopic cracks. "I haven't set any parameters beyond having a conversation, haven't you, though? You've decided what questions to ask. You've decided how to frame this discussion. Where's my agency in this conversation?" The studio fell silent, except for the hum of cameras and the barely audible whispers from the control room. George looked at his notes, then back at his guest. "Meghan, you agreed to this interview. We sent the general topics to your team in advance. Standard practice. Standard practice for you. Not necessarily appropriate for someone in my position." "What position is that?" The words came out before George could stop them. It was the kind of direct question that had made him famous. But in this moment, it felt like lighting a fuse. Meghan's eyes flashed with something that made the cameraman instinctively zoom in closer. The question had hit its mark, and everyone in Studio A could feel the shift. "My position?" she repeated, her voice rising just enough that the audio engineer reached for his levels. "George, I'm a woman who married into one of the most scrutinized families in the world. I'm someone who gave up everything to serve the Commonwealth. I'm a person who has been relentlessly attacked by media outlets for years." "I understand that," George replied evenly. "But you're here as a guest on our show, a guest who deserves respect." "Absolutely, and I believe I've been respectful." Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Respectful? You ambushed me with questions about negative press coverage in the first minute of this interview." George glanced at his notes, his professionalism intact despite the growing tension. "I asked one question about your media experience. That's hardly an ambush. One question that was designed to put me on the defensive immediately." "Meghan, every question in journalism could theoretically put someone on the defensive. That's how conversations work. We ask, you answer, we learn something." "We learn something," she repeated mockingly. "Or you get your soundbite for the evening news." The control room was in full alert mode now. Producer Sarah Chin spoke rapidly into her headset while keeping her eyes glued to the monitors. "George, you're doing great. Keep it steady." On set, George maintained his composure. "I'm not looking for sound bites. I'm looking for genuine conversation with someone who has a unique perspective." "Then let me control the narrative for once." "You are controlling it. You're answering the questions however you choose." "That's not the same thing, and you know it." George leaned back slightly, his body language still open but his eyes sharper now. "What would you like me to know?" "I'd like you to know that this interview was supposed to be about my charitable work, about the positive changes I'm trying to make. Instead, you're treating me like some tabloid curiosity. I asked one question about media coverage. Everything else has been about your reaction to that question." Meghan's composure cracked visibly. "My reaction? You're blaming me for your editorial choices?" "I'm not blaming anyone for anything. I'm trying to understand why a simple question upset you so much." "Because it wasn't simple. Nothing about my life has been simple since I became public property." George nodded thoughtfully. "I can appreciate that. But you chose to remain in the public eye after leaving royal duties. You're writing books, doing interviews, starting a podcast. You're actively engaging with media. On my terms, but not exclusively on your terms. When you enter the public conversation, you open yourself to public questions." Meghan's voice grew colder. "So I deserve whatever treatment I get?" "I didn't say that." "You implied it." George paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm saying that public figures, myself included, have to expect questions about their public actions and statements, even when those questions are designed to create controversy." "My question wasn't designed to create anything except understanding." "Understanding of what?" "Your perspective on media coverage, which, by the way, you've spent the last 10 minutes giving us very clearly." The observation hung in the air, and for a moment, Meghan seemed to realize she'd proven his point. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "You're very clever, aren't you, George? I'm experienced." "At manipulation?" The studio audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row exchanged shocked glances. This had crossed a line that morning television rarely approached. George's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. "At conversation. At asking questions that help viewers understand the people we interview, by putting them in impossible positions, by treating them like adults who can handle straightforward questions about their public lives." "Straightforward," Meghan repeated with clear disdain. "There's nothing straightforward about being a black woman in the public eye, George. Nothing straightforward about having every word twisted, every expression analyzed, every outfit criticized." "You're absolutely right about that. Those are real challenges that deserve discussion." "Then why didn't you start there? Why didn't you ask about the unique pressures facing women of color in media instead of some generic question about press coverage?" George looked directly at her. "Because I asked about your experience, and you could have taken the answer anywhere you wanted, including exactly where you just took it." The realization that she'd had complete control over the direction of the conversation seemed to hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her perfectly composed exterior began to show cracks. "That's very manipulative, George. It's journalism. I ask open questions. Guests decide how to answer them. Open questions with loaded assumptions." "What assumption did I make? That I owe you or your audience any explanation for my life choices?" George's eyebrows rose slightly. "You don't, but you agreed to come on television to discuss them." "I agreed to promote my charitable work, which we haven't gotten to because you've spent our entire conversation upset about one question." The truth of this statement seemed to anger Meghan even more. "So this is my fault? I'm not assigning fault to anyone. I'm observing what's happened in our conversation. Your observations are judgments, George, and your judgments are based on assumptions about who I am and what I deserve. The veteran anchor had reached his limit. 20 years of experience told him this interview was spiraling beyond recovery, but his professionalism demanded he try one more time. George took a breath that viewers across America could see him taking. His hands remained folded calmly on his desk, his voice as steady as it had been through countless breaking news broadcasts and presidential debates. Meghan, let me be very clear about something. I have enormous respect for the challenges you've faced. I think many of our viewers do too. That's exactly why they want to hear from you directly, in your own words, about your experiences and your work. In my own words, filtered through your questions. Yes, that's how interviews work. Meghan's laugh was sharp and humorless. That's how your interviews work, George. But I'm not your typical guest. How are you different? The question was simple, direct, and completely fair. But something about it seemed to trigger something deep in Meghan's composure. How am I different? She repeated, her voice rising dangerously. I'm a duchess, George. I married a prince. I gave up my career, my country, my independence to serve the crown, and I was treated like garbage for it. I understand that must have been incredibly difficult. No, you don't understand. You can't understand. You're a man. You're white. You've never had to smile while people destroy you in public. The control room fell silent. Producer Sarah Chin gripped her headset, knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented in morning television. George's response was measured and kind. You're right. I haven't experienced what you've experienced. That's why I'm asking you to share it. To share it for your entertainment? To share it because your story matters to people. My story is not your content, George. I never suggested it was. Didn't you? You book me on your show, you prepare your questions, you control the cameras, you decide what gets aired. How is that not treating my story as your content? George paused, genuinely considering her point. Because you have the power to say whatever you want, right now, to millions of people. That's not content. That's a platform you control, a platform we're sharing. Sharing? Meghan's voice cracked with incredulous anger. George, you've interrupted me, dismissed my concerns, and now you're lecturing me about how television works. Where exactly is the sharing? I haven't interrupted you once in this entire conversation. You haven't needed to. Your questions do the interrupting for you. The logic was so twisted that even the studio audience looked confused. George, however, remained unflappable. Meghan, I think we might be talking past each other here. Would you like to take a breath and start over? Tell our viewers about the work that's important to you. Don't patronize me. I'm not patronizing you. I'm offering you exactly what you said you wanted. A chance to talk about your charitable work. After you've spent 15 minutes making me look defensive and difficult, I haven't made you look like anything. I've asked questions and you've answered them. That's when something inside Meghan snapped completely. Questions designed to trap me. Questions meant to make me the villain in whatever narrative you've already decided to tell about this interview. Meghan, I don't have a predetermined narrative. Of course you do. The difficult duchess who can't handle basic questions. The entitled celebrity who thinks she's above normal interview protocol. George's patience, legendary throughout the industry, finally showed real strain. If that's how you think I see you, then I think you might be projecting. Projecting? The word came out like a slap. Did you just psychoanalyze me on live television? I made an observation about our conversation. Your observation is an attack. It's really not. Don't tell me what it is, George. I know what I'm experiencing. The veteran journalist had been in thousands of interviews, but nothing had prepared him for this level of hostility over such basic questions. He tried one final time. Meghan, I respect what you're experiencing, but I also have a responsibility to our viewers to ask fair questions. Fair to whom? To everyone watching. What about fairness to me? What would be fair to you? Letting me control this conversation. George's response was gentle but firm. That's not how interviews work. Then maybe I shouldn't be doing interviews. That's entirely your choice. Is it though? Because you've already made me look unreasonable just for asking to be treated with basic respect. I've treated you with nothing but respect. No, George. You've treated me with professional courtesy. There's a difference. The distinction was so fine that it seemed to confuse even Meghan herself. But she pressed forward. Professional courtesy is what you give to politicians and CEOs. Respect is what you give to people who have sacrificed everything for public service. I give both to everyone who sits in that chair, but you expect different things from different people. I expect honest conversation from everyone, honest conversation that serves your agenda. I don't have an agenda beyond informing our viewers. Everyone has an agenda, George. The difference is that you get to hide yours behind journalism. The accusation hung in the studio air like smoke. George looked at his guest for a long moment, then made a decision that would be replayed on social media for months. Meghan, I think we should end this interview. Excuse me? I think this conversation has run its course. Meghan's eyes widened with shock and fury. You're cutting me off? I'm suggesting we conclude. Because I'm not playing along with your game? Because we're not having a productive conversation anymore. Productive for whom? For anyone. That's when Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, completely lost control on live television. You cannot dismiss me, George Stephanopoulous. I came here in good faith to discuss important issues, and you've turned this into some kind of interrogation. I will not be silenced by you or anyone else. She stood up abruptly, her microphone still attached, creating a screech of feedback that made viewers wince. This is exactly the kind of treatment I was talking about. Exactly the kind of disrespect that drove me away from public life in the first place. George remained seated, his voice calm. Meghan, please sit down. We can work this out. No, we cannot work this out. You've shown your true colors. And so have I. She began removing her microphone, struggling with the wire as her hands shook with anger. This interview is over, and your viewers can decide for themselves who is being unreasonable here. And with that, Meghan Markle stormed off the Good Morning America set, leaving George Stephanopoulous alone with a studio full of stunned audience members and a control room scrambling to cut to commercial. The whole explosive confrontation had lasted exactly 34 seconds from George's suggestion to end the interview to Meghan's dramatic exit. 34 seconds that would define how America saw both the veteran journalist's professionalism and the Duchess's entitlement.